everyone, and welcome to the Advance Wars Iceberg. Yeah, the Advance Wars Iceberg. When most people hear Advance Wars, they usually only think of 4 games, the 2 on the Gameboy Advance and the 2 on the Nintendo DS, Dual Strike and Days of Ruin. Bright colors, turn-based strategy, and memorable commanding officers. For many players, that's where their understanding of the series begins and ends. But the truth is, Advance Wars is only a part of a much larger franchise. Long before the series ever came to the West, it began in Japan as Famicom Wars, a tactical war game series that dates all the way back to the Famicom era. Over time, it evolved across multiple systems, spun off into entirely different genres like Battalion Wars, and quietly built decades of history, design philosophy, unused ideas, and strange decisions and oddities that most players will never even notice. All of this was created by Intelligent Systems, the same studio behind Fire Emblem and Paper Mario, a developer known for hiding surprising depth beneath colorful, approachable visuals. Despite being a Japanese series initially, Advance Wars found its strongest audience in the West. In fact, its fan base outside Japan has remained remarkably dedicated long after new entries stopped appearing, to include an online competitive community that still has players to this very day, keeping the series alive even during its long hiatuses. Now, to be clear, there are other icebergs out there that cover Advance Wars, but I wanted to make one of my own. This is a chart I personally put together focusing more on interesting facts and trivia and the series as a whole, with only a handful of fan theories that I found to be particularly interesting and supported by real evidence. This iceberg is about everything beneath the surface. Lesser known entries in the franchise, localization changes, unspoken character dynamics, competitive secrets, development oddities, and the darker implications of a series that presents war like a board game. Some entries are well known, some are highly technical, and some are so deep that even longtime fans may not have even heard of them. We'll even touch on a strange pattern surrounding the series, the uncomfortable coincidence between Advance Wars releases and major real-world conflicts that seem to cross paths more often than anyone would expect, to include 9/11 and the war in Ukraine. Yeah, I'm not kidding, leading some fans to half-jokingly wonder whether the series itself might be cursed. So grab your favorite CO, make sure those subs have fuel, and let's descend the depth of the Advance Wars iceberg. And of course, if you liked the video, please consider hitting the like button, subscribing, and hey, share it with the community. I really want to know what they think. But with that all out of the way, let's begin. So for this first layer of the iceberg, we're going to stay right on the surface. This layer is simply about the games themselves. No deep lore, no hidden meanings, no reviews, no obscure trivia just yet. I'm going to be going through every major entry in the Wars franchise, starting all the way back with Famicom Wars and ending with the most recent release, Advance Wars 1 and 2 Reboot Camp. If you've only played a few of these games, or if you didn't even realize how many entries there actually are, this layer is here to give you the full picture of how large the series really is. Now keep in mind, this is an iceberg video, not a review video, so I'm not going to be reviewing the games themselves. I'm only going to be summarizing them. Please look into them for yourselves. I'll be kind of brief. First up is the game that started it all, Famicom Wars. The first game in the Wars series, created all the way back in 1988, before I was even born. And hey, I'm old as dirt. To begin with, look at this box art. I love this so much. Reminds me of my time in the service, but does it look like Advance Wars? Well, it plays a little differently. It's not Advance Wars yet. In this game, you play as either Red Star or Blue Moon Army, and it plays like a typical strategy game where you need to either capture the headquarters or eliminate all enemy units. Upon its release, it was very highly praised across the board as far as I can tell. And I couldn't really find any good translation, so I didn't play it much for myself. Next up is Game Boy Wars on the, what else, Nintendo Game Boy, the OG Game Boy. This game was released in 1991, only in Japan, and is the second game in the series. This time you will play as either Red Star or White Moon, and once again you will fight to either eliminate the enemy or capture their headquarters. Next up, we have Game Boy Wars Turbo, released 6 years later in 1997, and this is the first game in the series to be published by a different publisher, Hudson Soft. This game was a remake of the first Game Boy Wars with enhanced AI and new maps, as well as support for the Super Game Boy. A year later in 1998, we get Super Famicom Wars. This time I did play it for myself in color and with translations. It's more classic Advance Wars action, though I have to admit it's a bit slow, but it's colorful and fun, and you'll probably recognize some of the maps to this day. There are a lot of interesting facts about this game. For one, we get an introduction to COs for the first time and how their abilities alter the battle. More units were added, more maps, and the addition of 2 new nations, Green Earth and Yellow Comet. Finally, what's most interesting about this is that it was released digitally, not physically. Yes, all the way back in 1998. You had to download it using a service called Nintendo Power. No, not the magazine, but an actual cartridge writer. It's a bit outside of the scope of this video, so I just ask you to check it for yourselves, but it's a very interesting rabbit hole to go down. Again in 98, we get Game Boy Wars 2 on the Game Boy, obviously. Which isn't much, it's just a sequel of the first Game Boy Wars that adds more maps and a better AI. And remember, don't take my word for it, these games all look pretty good, and looks like there are some translations out there, you just have to know where to find them. Next up in 2001, we get Game Boy Wars 3, exclusively on the Nintendo Game Boy, and just 1 month before the first Advance Wars game to be released. This game once again features a better AI and better decision making and a better system for battles, which is a bit different. For example, indirect units can now move and shoot in the same turn. Finally, in 2001, released first in the US, is Advance Wars. Released in 2001. Yeah, we'll get into that in a bit. Japan wouldn't see a release until 2004, despite the fact that the game was made in Japan, and we'll get into that a bit later as well. Advance Wars is the first game with the term Advance in it. It's the game you know and love. You play as the Orange Star Army, traveling around the war's world, trying to get to the bottom of who's causing so many problems in the world and causing armies to clash. 2003 gives us Advance Wars 2, the second game with the word Advance in it. This time you get to play as all armies of the world as they stand now united against the Black Hole Army and Sturm, the antagonist of the first game. Next up, 2 years later in 2005, we get Advance Wars Dual Strike on the Nintendo DS. Get it? DS, Dual Strike? There's a lot of games that are named like that. This time he plays the Orange Star Army once again as they fight in a new region of the world known as Omega Land, who's under attack by the Black Hole Army. We don't get our protagonists from the first 2 games for some reason, but most of the cast do return. The main gimmick of this game is that instead of playing with 1 CO, you now play with 2 at the same time. Instead of using 1 superpower, you can use 2 at the same time if you build up your CO meter at the same time. Which is, of course, busted, but we'll get into that later. Next up, in 2005, once again, we get Battalion Wars on the Nintendo GameCube. Now you might be thinking, how on earth is this an Advance Wars game? Well, originally it was titled Advance Wars Under Fire, and in Japan it's known as Assault Famicom Wars. This game is totally different from anything we've had so far. You play as some commander who controls multiple units at once in real time. It's a RTS essentially, and it's kind of balls. You play as the Frontier going up against the Tundra. The Frontier is, if you can't tell, based on the US, and the Tundra is based on Russia. Yeah, I can't find many, secrets here or fun facts, but it's not related at all to Advance Wars, so we can move on. 2007 gives us Battalion Wars 2. A direct sequel to Battalion Wars, this time on the Nintendo Wii. It plays the same way, but with some upgrades to include naval and air units which fans of the original game were begging for, as in the first game you can only fight on land. Fun fact, this game was called Assault Famicom Wars Versus in Japan, and this time you play as 4 different nations in the world, all facing different and unique conflicts. 2008, we get Advance Wars Days of Ruin. This game's plot is the most unique in the series. It plays like Advance Wars once again, but this time in a different world or different continuity. While the weapons and units stay the same, here's no mention or reference to the original Advance Wars. No orange star, no black hole, nor anything else in the series thus far. You play in an apocalyptic world that has suffered through Armageddon before you even play the game. Meteors rained down from the sky one day and wiped out most of the population, causing dust to fill the sky, the sun's rays being blocked. Humanity's survivors, however, once began to recover, but then immediately resumed their hostilities against each other. But again, this is caused by an outside force meddling, which, notice the pattern? Then again, meteors hit in the world. In this world, is that really that unusual? Maybe this is the timeline in which Sturm wins. Either way, there's talk of different nations, different conflicts, and different leaders. It's a great game, one of my favorites of all time. Finally, 15 years later, you heard me right, in 2023, finally, after much delay, we get Advance Wars 1 and 2 Reboot Camp, which sadly failed, did very poorly, and now seems to have finally buried the series for good. But never give up hope, as the fan base is still alive and well, as we will see later on. This game is just a remake of the first two games on the Game Boy Advance with upgraded graphics, a totally new art style, voice acting, and some quality of life improvements such as a speed up feature. What's really cool about this game is that it's actually incredibly faithful to the original two games. The designers intentionally left in the gameplay mechanics, balanced or not, as to be as faithful as possible. And as of now, that's it for Layer 1. Now again, this is the Advance Wars Iceberg, so I won't be going into too much detail on the other games. Just know that they exist, and Advance Wars is a small part of a larger Wars franchise. Now without further ado, let's move on to the next layer. Layer 2. Intelligence Systems. Intelligence Systems is the original developer of the Wars franchise and was founded all the way back in 1983. Yeah, over 40 years ago, and still running strong to this day. Their very first game was Mario Bros. Yeah, no kidding. Co-developed with Nintendo RD themselves. Wow. They have quite the catalog of games, as you can imagine, to include the Paper Mario series and the Fire Emblem series. Although not all games in the franchise were developed by Intelligent Systems, of course, as they sometimes passed the baton to other developers for games like Battalion Wars and the latest game in the franchise, Reboot Camp. But you know what? Keep strong, Intelligent Systems, and thanks for an amazing franchise. What's an airport? What's an airport is the biggest and most iconic meme in the fandom of Advance Wars. If an Advance Wars player asks you, what's an airport, you better be ready to answer, or else they're probably going to call you out on it. It's that big of a meme. You see, in the first game, we see Andy, who is our main protagonist, along with Sammy and Max, ask his fellow commanding officers, "What's an airport again?" Which is just the goofiest line imaginable for an officer leading an army to ask. Now, in reality, this is just a way for the player to be reminded of what an airport does, but I mean, isn't that a bit insulting to the player? Like, who wouldn't know what an airport is? Maybe. JP Advance Wars 1 and 2. So, would you believe me if I told you that Advance Wars might be a cursed franchise? Seriously. I've been talking about doing this video since late November, and as soon as I started to record, I got sick. So that's not fun. Sorry if I sound like I'm coughing up a lung here. Advance Wars, despite being developed in Japan, was released first in the US, which is interesting given that originally the game wasn't planned to leave Japan at all in the beginning. However, due to the fact that Game Boy Wars 3 was released that same year, Advance Wars was delayed as to not cause competition within the same franchise, given that Game Boy Wars 3 was an exclusive title to Japan. Advance Wars would be delayed again and again, however, due to several issues, and didn't get a release in Japan until after Advance Wars 2 came out in the US. In 2004, Japan finally got to play a game that was originally designed by the Japanese in Advance Wars 1 and 2, which is a combination cartridge of the two games on a single GBA cartridge. Again, just one of the many oddities revolving the releases of these games. Japan delays. A bit redundant, you might think here. This entry just refers to the fact that each and every game with the name Advance Wars in the title has been delayed in Japan, and Reboot Camp never even came out in Japan. Every single one except for Dual Strike, which was released to critical acclaim, winning several awards for some reason. Even though this game is the least talked about, it's the only one that didn't suffer the curse of the release date delays in Japan. 9/10/2001. So to begin with, I'm not trying to make light of a real-world tragedy, and it was just that, a horrible tragedy. However, it's remiss of me not to mention that 9/10/2001 was the day that Advance Wars released in the US, a game all about going to war. Obviously, there's no tie to the game and the real-world event other than that, but 9/11 was the major reason for the delay of the first game in the rest of the world, including Japan. They didn't want to release a game as it's about war, obviously, and didn't want to seem insensitive. Really, it's just horrible, horrible bad luck, but could it be the start to the curse? Ukraine war. Again, not trying to make light of a horrible topic. Once again, this is a terrible tragedy, a war that, as far as I'm recording when you're listening to this, is still ongoing. It's a senseless waste of human life. However, I have to mention yet again the curse. Advance Wars Reboot Camp was originally scheduled to release in the US in December 2021, which was delayed for several reasons and rescheduled to release in March of 2022. However, the greatest joke on earth is this: man makes plans and God laughs. The planned release date was 1 month after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and so the game's release date was scheduled again to April of 2023, which sadly at that point all of the original hype had died down. I personally remembered really wanting to play this game and was planning to get it day one, but it was delayed. And I remembered hearing nothing about it, and I just kind of forgot all about it. And one day randomly I remembered it existed and saw it at my local Best Buy, and I picked it up. And while the game itself isn't bad, it's really just not the best either. I'd rather just play the original on Game Boy Advance, and I felt like many other players felt the same way. But still, once again, we have a horrible real-world tragedy pushing back the release of this game, of a game in the Advance Wars franchise. Furthermore, this game has yet to be released in any other country other than the US, which you might think is due to the war, but with the mediocre sales numbers, the lack of interest, I think it's safe to say this game isn't getting released outside of North America anytime soon. Advance Wars by Web. Advance Wars by Web is an online free-to-play game you can play right now on your PC. It's a recreation of Advance Wars, only this time to be played online in real-time multiplayer style, similar to Pokemon Showdown, if you know what that is. It's a game made by the fans for the fans. Now I want to stress, this is impressive, and is proof that there's still a strong fan base that wants more Advance Wars action. It was created all the way back in 2004, yeah, seriously, by a man named Aaron Mariner, who has quite the portfolio. It's upkept to this day by the community. I didn't play it for myself, as I'm pretty sure I would just get, well, destroyed, but it has a vibrant community to this day. I recommend you check it out. Mangs. So this entry is dedicated to all of those YouTubers out there that are still repping Advance Wars. Mangs in particular. As I've already mentioned, Advance Wars has a strong online following and community to this day. So strong, in fact, that I really hope that some of you are watching this video and enjoying it. Though there are plenty of them, possibly the biggest YouTube channel that covers Advance Wars is Mangs, a Norwegian YouTuber who plays Advance Wars on his channel, as well as other similar games such as Fire Emblem and Unicorn Overlord. He makes great content and even branched out a bit into waifu gacha games such as Girls Frontline 2. You know how much I love that. The reason I chose Mangs specifically, other than the fact that he is a much larger YouTuber than myself, is that, well, I'm biased. Check this out for yourself.
And the last comment I'll be reading in this video is from Red Showman, and he says, better translation, get rid of the bad faith localizers. Amen, brother. Amen. Me too, man. Me too.
Based. Thanks for reading my comment, Mangs. Please check him out. I'll link his channel down below. Rivals. Rivals is the final mission of Advance Wars 1. This is interesting for two reasons. For one, it's infamously difficult, and for two, it's easy to miss in a casual playthrough. I did it myself. I mean, it's optional, and I entirely missed it. Even though I knew I was supposed to unlock it, I completely forgot. It's a mission in which you must play as Andy, going up against Eagle in a friendly match. Yeah, a friendly sparring match with soldiers dying on the battlefields, just to see who can piss farther. In order to unlock this on the Game Boy Advance version, you must play through the missions Captain Drake, Naval Clash, Wings of Victory, and Battle Mystery with Sami, all on the same playthrough. Then after you beat the final mission, Eagle will challenge Andy to a final duel, Rivals. On the Switch version, this is a bit less esoteric. All you have to do is complete every mission and every optional mission to finally unlock this. It is the final mission after all. And there are other hidden missions in Advance Wars 1, such as Olaf's Sea Strike mission, use Andy on mission 4, then defeat every enemy unit in mission 6. Sonia's Secret Battles, in which you have to beat Kanbei arrives in 8 or few turns. Mighty Kanbei in 10 or fewer turns, and Kanbei's Error in 12 turns or less. There are many secret unlockables in the games other than that, but that's not the focus of this layer, so I'll leave it at that. I'll let you find them for yourselves, though I will be going over some more hidden secrets below. The Advisor. Ooh, spooky stuff. The Advisor is simply the name for your player character in Advance Wars 1. Yeah, you play as yourself in that game, giving orders to Andy, Max, and Sami. You aren't given a face and barely are a part of the team, and you're barely even referred to, only every so often being mentioned, so it's just kind of pointless. So pointless, in fact, that the Advisor is never seen again in any other Advance Wars game, even the reboot. It's not a big deal, it's just kind of wacky. Dual Strike is broken. Another meme in the franchise is Advance Wars Dual Strike, as it's seen as the most broken one due to the crazy combinations you can pull off with the Dual Strike CO superpower, which lets you have 2 turns at once, which is just insane. It's so insane, in fact, that nothing else in the game really matters. Just build up your CO power and let it rip, at least on the campaign. So consider Eagle. You know what his superpower is? His superpower is giving you another move on your same turn, at least with your vehicle units. When playing Eagle, you move first, then before you end your turn, activate your superpower and it allows you to go again. So then consider this. Imagine using him in a dual strike scenario. You take your turn and then you use dual strike. At that point, Eagle gets a second turn, and when he does, guess what? You switch for a third turn. Then it gets even worse when you pair him up with Sami. Sami's superpower is allowing her to capture any base in one turn, regardless of the HP level of the unit, to include headquarters, which you need to capture in order to win the game. So imagine this scenario. Eagle moves an infantry into a transport copter. That copter moves towards the HQ. Then you use dual strike to move it again and unload the infantry unit next to the HQ. You then switch to Sami, who moves the infantry onto the HQ, and then checkmate. But with that, let's move on to Layer 3. Layer 3. American Influence. So what I'm referring to here is the fact that by the time Advance Wars Days of Ruin was being released, Advance Wars was a far more successful series in the West as opposed to Japan. This isn't really fair, of course, as Advance Wars just had a really rough time in Japan for reasons outside of its control. Advance Wars Days of Ruin is a notably much darker game in the franchise, having nothing to do with previous games, and it's much more realistic and a lot darker. Furthermore, the story is much more bleak as well, more action movie-y, something you might expect to see out of an American cinema, you know. For one, people are actually unalived in this game. Yeah, imagine that, a game about war where people are unalived. Whoa. The reason for this narrative and tonal shift was due to the American influence, as this game was released and specifically designed to be more gritty and realistic and appeal to the Western audience who was seen as wanting that style of game more than the cartoony version. I do want to go out on a limb here and say that that's probably not true, because other than me, most people don't talk about Days of Ruin at all. Everyone just talks about Advance Wars 2. And it's withstood the test of time far better, even if I personally prefer Days of Ruin. But you know, because waifus. But more importantly, I just found the plot to be more fun, more engaging, and with more real stakes. I mean, this is war. Still, if you play through the Days of Ruin, it's easy to see its American influence. The characters all kind of act like they're in a movie, you know? They're kind of cheesy, they're pretty one-note. They're all either totally goody-goody good boy or horribly evil puppy-kicking monster, you know. I'd say the character that has the most depth is Lynn, but we all know Dr. Morris is best girl. Localization changes. Advance Wars 1 had quite a few localization changes between the Japanese and United States versions, which again is ironic as it released to the US first and far sooner than in Japan, so the original versions were actually released secondary in a way. Most of the changes came from the COs, so to begin with, names. Andy was once named Ryo, Sami was Domino, Nell was Catherine, Drake was Mop, okay, Olaf was Whip, I have no idea what that means. If anyone knows, let me know. Grit was Billy. Kanbei was Kikuchio, which we'll talk about a lot more later. Sonya was Asuka. And Sturm was Heribos. Alright. Next up, we have the outfit changes. Originally, Grit wore a cowboy hat. Drake looked more like a pirate than a naval officer. Olaf looked like he was Santa Claus for some reason. Kanbei was dressed to look more like a traditional samurai. Although, fun fact, there's actually an unreleased version of Advance Wars that was going to come out in China, in which Kanbei looks a lot different in that version too. Supposedly because they didn't want a traditional Japanese officer look in China. I can't imagine why. But anyway, Sonya wore red and had glasses, and Nell showed off quite a bit more skin. Finally, the Orange Star Army was originally the Red Star Army. Yeah, tying it back to Gameboy Wars. This was undoubtedly changed as to avoid being associated with communism. Finally, the COs were originally called Shoguns. If you can find any more localization changes, let me know. But for now, let's move on. Nell scolds Andy. In the very first mission of the game, it's possible to get some unique dialogue from Nell. The mission is named Cleanup, and it's basically a tutorial level. I mean, you'd have to go out of your way to lose it. However, you can go out of your way to lose it, but not just by being wiped out. If you run out of fuel on the mission, Nell will pop up and scold Andy or you for screwing around too much, and then give you a tutorial on how to restart the mission. Hilarious. Place units on the wrong tile 50 times. So on top of being a war strategy game, Advance Wars is also a game that allows you to get your creative side on via the map editor mode. This is present in most of the Advance Wars games, as you're allowed to create the map however you want to include bases and units. However, if you attempt to put a unit on the water, the game will not allow you to do so, as it just can't exist there. If you then attempt to do this again, 50 times in a row, guess what? Nell will pop up and mock you for it. She will tell you, "You must really like doing that, huh? Keep it up." I can't tell if that's threatening or insulting, but either way, it's amazing. Copter tactics. Not much here. In the 7th mission of the first game, Copter Tactics, you are encouraged to win by seizing the headquarters as it's wide open and the enemy force is overwhelming. However, with some careful planning and pro performance, you can in fact win this mission by defeating all of the enemies. If you do, Nell will cut in with some special dialogue admitting that she didn't even think it was possible. Nice work. 2-week test. This is a fun one. I tested it out for myself. It works. So in the mission 2-week test in the second game, you play as Colin and are told you must hold out for 2 weeks for reinforcements to arrive. However, this map can be beaten by doing absolutely nothing. And I mean absolutely nothing. Don't build anything, don't attack, don't defend, nada. The enemy will literally not reach you in time to capture your base, though they might get close, meaning that this mission can be beaten by doing absolutely nothing. This was fixed in Reboot Camp, however. Map Editor Glitch. The map editor glitch is simultaneously the most useful and most game-breaking glitch in Advance Wars history. It's a bit complex, so I doubt you'll actually write this down, so I advise you to look into it yourself. I tested it out and it works. To summarize, this glitch allows you to use the map editor functions outside of map editor mode, namely the campaign. Now, I don't have to tell you, but the ability to add and delete units at your will is unimaginably helpful in game. It trivializes everything, and it's just hilarious. Dual strike pair-ups. This might sound a bit redundant at first, but the 2 COs you pick in Dual Strike can massively change the game, obviously. Yet it goes even further when you consider that there are some COs that get a bonus when paired with others that the game doesn't tell you about. Now the game will tell you on the CO bio screen, however, that there are pair-ups that work together well, such as Colin and Sasha. However, there are other pair-ups that are hidden that work well together and some that hinder you. The strongest pair-up in the game is Nell-Rachel, as they are sisters after all. But Rachel also has a small pair-up boost with Sasha. Some of the more strange ones are Javier and Grimm. As far as I know, the two don't really interact much at all in the story. And some of the negative ones are Hawk and Eagle, as canonically they are enemies, though they don't interact at all in the story that I remember. Von Bolt, when used in versus or free battle mode, pairs poorly with everyone, but he's one of the strongest COs in the game, so it shouldn't matter too much. Finally, the worst pair-up possible, get this, is Rachel and Cole. This is likely because in-game, Cole goes out of his way to call Rachel ugly. This isn't the worst pair-up, it's the worst by far. There are plenty of others, and I'll invite you to look into it yourselves. Sami was censored. Oh boy, my favorite topic. While doing the research more thoroughly as I'm recording this, it seems more like censored is the wrong word, more like original design. So as you know, Intelligent Systems didn't develop every game in the franchise. Some were made by other developers such as Hudson Soft. Reboot Camp was developed by a company named WayForward, a developer themselves with quite a catalog. Now recall the YouTuber I spoke about earlier, Mangs. Mangs has an inside source, or had an inside source at WayForward. This individual supposedly leaked info to him before, but it's all the internet, so you have to take it in good faith. Sadly, the individual themselves was let go a few years ago, but he did have an anonymous interview with Mangs for his channel, going by Anvil. In this interview, which is good by the way, I advise you check it out, the topic of Sami's original design came up. Apparently early on in planning, Sami was supposed to look a bit different, meaning that she had larger breasts and jiggle physics. This individual that Mangs interviewed stated that this had to be changed as it made the Karens in the office, the women in the office feel uncomfortable. Now, far be it from me to criticize Mangs, I get it, he didn't want to burn that bridge, But if it were me, I would have pushed back a little on this. Like, I mean, was it a joke? How bad could it have really been? Was it ever seriously considered? And given the fact that the game sold so poorly anyway, would it really have hurt? I guess if I was going to play devil's advocate, the game looks the most cartoonish it ever has, and even worse than Battalion Wars. So depending on how, gooner it was, it might have been out of place. But still, I wasn't there, I haven't seen the original design, I have no idea. Anvil simply states that it was disrespectful to women and made the women feel uncomfortable. Do I have to say it? No, I'm not going to say it, but we may never know. I'm willing to give it slight benefit of the doubt here, as we do get some jiggle physics with Nell, so it's not like they were totally against making attractive characters. But still, Fire Emblem. As I've already mentioned, Advance Wars was developed by the same developers that created Fire Emblem. But did you know that if you are in the US or in the West in general, and you're a fan of Fire Emblem, you probably have Advance Wars to thank for it. You see, as I've already mentioned, Advance Wars was never supposed to come to the US at all. Neither was Fire Emblem. Advance Wars did release in the US, however, and was highly received and beloved. It was this success that prompted Japan to try releasing Fire Emblem in the US as well, which was also popularly received, and to this day has even surpassed Advance Wars in popularity and mainstream appeal, for better or worse. I mean, remember playing Super Smash Bros. Melee and seeing Roy and Marth? Don't you remember thinking, who the hell are these guys? And what's a Fire Emblem? And what's an airport? Well, now you know, and it's all thanks in part to the release of Advance Wars in the US. And with that, we'll move on to the next layer. Layer 4. Days of Ruin Japanese release. Days of Ruin officially released in the US on January 21st, 2008. I remember making a special trip just to go get it. I still love this game, and I can turn it on any day and still enjoy it. But as usual, Days of Ruin was developed in Japan, but would not only release in the US first, but would get delayed multiple times in Japan, and eventually even officially canceled. Yes, the game got canceled in Japan, and it's never had a physical release to this day. However, the Japanese fanbase did get a chance to play this game, as it would later be released 5 years later in 2013, exclusively as a digital download via Club Nintendo as a platinum reward. Yeah, you couldn't even buy the Japanese version, it was just that exclusive, which is just wild. I couldn't find any official reason as to why it was delayed and canceled. If I had to guess, it was so heavy with Western influence, but I'm only grasping at straws with that. So for Days of Ruin, it's lucky the Japanese got it at all, and even luckier if you were one of the few that actually got to play it. IDS. This will be brief. IDS stands for Intelligence Defense Systems and is essentially a side villain in the world of Days of Ruin. They're responsible for arming both sides of the Great War that takes place long before the events of the game. The reason I put this on the Iceberg is because while I was making the Iceberg, I never noticed, but Intelligence Systems, yeah, sorry, I don't know what I was thinking with this one. Kanji map. In the original Advance Wars game, if you go to the map editor screen, while holding L and R, you will be taken to a map already populated with trees and mountains. While you may not be able to tell just from looking at it at all, if you zoom out, you can see that these landmarks are actually kanji, the kanji writing system that to this day has still defeated me in my Japanese learning experience. Oh lord. The kanji stands for Nintendo. Neat. And yes, it was in the English version of the game, meaning that if you somehow stumbled across this by accident, and you somehow managed to deduce that it was kanji, and somehow knew the kanji, you had a cool little surprise. Awesome. War Groove. Wargroove marks the first of a trilogy of indie games that were made as a spiritual successor to Advance Wars. Yeah, so not only are Advance Wars cursed, but these inspired games were pretty cursed as well. This one, however, is probably the most well received of the three. Now, I hate to judge a book by its cover, but this art style makes me kind of cringe a bit, but I'm also kind of biased, to be fair. This game was developed by Studio Chucklefish and is said to be a decent game, but the online mode was so bad that it killed it, as it was hilariously broken. In my opinion, this game looks more like a combination of Fire Emblem and Advance Wars, which is pretty cool, but it looks a lot more like the much better game Unicorn Overlord, which I cannot recommend enough. Anyway, check it out for yourself if you wish. You can find it on Steam right now. Warside. This was another Advance Wars spiritual successor created by the indie developer known as Lava Bird. Now, I've never played either of these three games, but this one is the one I hear the most negative things about. Now, I did watch some footage for the game and, I don't know, it looked cool to me, but in my opinion, it looks way too much like Advance Wars, or at least a watered down lesser version of it. So if that's the case, then why not just play Advance Wars? Check it out for yourself if you want. It's on Steam right now. Finally, Tiny Metal. Rounding this trio out is Tiny Metal, developed by the indie studio Area 35. Now keep in mind, I haven't played either of these three games for myself, so I'm going to withhold judgment on the gameplay. I mean, just from what I'm seeing, it looks okay, I guess. However, this game is not infamous for its quality, though I hear it's not very good. It's infamous for its Kickstarter controversies. Another one of those. Former employees of Area 35 allege that the original creator stole funds from his other Kickstarter campaign for a game known as Project Phoenix in order to create this game. Now, it's important to note that the employee that made this accusation actually would go on to recant his statement and admit that he made it up. This is all after a long legal battle in Japan. Other than that, this Iceberg only serves to inform and summarize, so really, check all these games out for yourself. They might be amazing, I don't know. I just don't want to, yay or nay you either way. I just want to inform you, so check them out. Personally, I'll just stick to Advance Wars. Olaf and Drake change the weather. CO powers give you a massive advantage in the game. Some COs are literally just walking superpowers. They don't have any other advantages other than that. These superpowers are sometimes literal, as in they actually seem to have some supernatural abilities. What else would you call changing the weather? Olaf's Blizzard causes snow for the turn, hindering enemy units while not hindering his, and of course does global damage to all enemy units. Drake's superpower does the same, but this time for rain, causing rain to fall for a turn and doing global damage while having the fuel of enemy units, which is just the worst. For Drake specifically though, there's a unique buff to his character. In his character bio, it states that storms seem to follow him naturally. Most people would just think this is useless favor text, but there is evidence that rain actually does literally follow Drake without the use of his CO power. If you select Drake in a free battle mode and set the weather to random, there is a higher chance of rain occurring in the game so long as Drake is on the field. Higher than any other CO and exclusive only to Drake, proving that yes, Drake has some supernatural ability to change the weather, even when he can't control it. Grit's Defection. Alright, so we're going off in a bit of fan theory zone, supported by some evidence. And here we need to read between the lines a bit, as we're not given much. Grit is one of the strongest COs in the entire game, giving him +1 range to all of his indirect units naturally. He is a CO for Blue Moon. However, he didn't start off in Blue Moon. At one point, he was an Orange Star CO and later defected to Blue Moon. However, he doesn't really have love for Blue Moon or hate for Orange Star. He simply left on his own, and it's just sorta goes along with Olaf for the heck of it seems like. His motivations are so vague that it even led to Black Hole, namely Adder, seeking him out, asking him to join Black Hole instead, which he briefly considers. So why did he defect in the first place? Well, in some blink and you'll miss it text, it's implied that Grit at—
That's it!
What's up, Iggy?
I've come up with a new recipe.
Can't wait to try it.
one time had feelings for Nell, and so did Max. And somewhat of a love triangle formed. We don't know how it all played out, but no one is a pair in the game, and Grit left Orange Star. However, it's not like Grit and Max have any negative feelings towards each other, at least not much, especially since they have a great pair up in Dual Strike. Again, not much here, it just makes you wonder, or makes you wish, I should say, that we had more fleshed out lore for these characters other than just some little, text here and there. Like, why did exactly Grit defect? We may never know. But with that, we'll move on to Layer 5. Layer 5. Billy Gates. So here's a fun one. In Super Famicom Wars, you have the option to pick COs for the first time. One of these COs is named Billy Gates. It's based on the real-world billionaire and vaccine enthusiast, for some reason, Bill Gates. In the game, his ability is just that. He's rich, and is given more money per turn than any other commander. Interesting. I wonder if Bill Gates himself knew about this. Hitler. Good lord. No, that's not a typo, and it's not censorship for YouTube shenanigans or whatever. Hitler is a playable character in Super Famicom Wars. A playable character. And that's right. This character was modeled and designed after Mr. Evil Mustache himself, Adolf. Better be careful. For some reason, Adolf seems to find his way into a lot of Japanese media, such as in Persona 2, where he's a villain. However, here, he's playable, meaning that there exists a war game in which you play, unironically, as a parody version of Adolf, or a version of him. Though it's just a parody, my jaw dropped when I found this out. I just couldn't believe it. I mean, what were they thinking? Battle Cube. So I couldn't find any evidence for this one myself as to the reasoning, but the map Battle Cube was supposedly changed from the Japanese to the US version. This was likely due to the fact that it resembles a swastika, but again, the only source for this I found was one video by the YouTuber Ephraim225. I recommend you check him out. 64 Wars. 64 Wars was a planned Advanced Wars game, or at least a game in the Wars franchise that was planned to be released on what else? The Nintendo 64. The game would have been released in 1999 and was being developed by Hudson Soft. Not much is known about this game or why it was ultimately cancelled, just another victim of the Wars curse, I guess. The game would have played like Advance Wars, just on a Nintendo 64. Though it was cancelled, you can still find footage of it online as it was shown off at Space World 1999. This is 2 years before Advance Wars 1, meaning it actually would have been a continuation of Famicom Wars. Kikuchiyo. As I mentioned earlier, Kikuchiyo is the Japanese name of Kanbei, the CO of the Yellow Comet Army. Kikuchiyo had the largest change in his design, which is a loss in my opinion as he looks badass here. But there's a lot more to it than that. You see, it's likely he is named after the characters from Akira Kurosawa's movie Seven Samurai, namely Kikuchiyo. On top of that, in the same movie, there's another main character who is also a samurai who was named Kambei with an M, which is pretty cool, obviously. I do wish they would have kept his original design, but obviously this is a localization change, probably not done maliciously, most likely done just to help make it for a Western audience. Badass. Night Wars. Night Wars was a canceled spin-off project in the Wars franchise specifically tied to the Battalion Wars series, rather than the Advance Wars games. It was in development during the mid-2000s, around 06 to 07, for the Nintendo Wii, of all things, and was being worked on by Kuju London, later known as Headstrong Games, the same studio responsible for Battalion Wars and Battalion Wars 2. The game was intended to adapt the real-time, action-focused gameplay of Battalion Wars into a medieval fantasy setting. Instead of tanks and infantry, players would have commanded units like knights, archers, cavalry, I assume wizards and mages, with influences drawn from Arthurian legend and classic fantasy warfare. Descriptions from people familiar with the project suggest it would have involved large-scale battles, mounted combat, sieges, you get the idea. The project was also known as Castle Wars. It had a highlight again on medieval combat, sieges. I'm just thinking about how badass that would be, right? Not much else is known about the game or why it was canceled. I think this is a real shame. I would have loved to see that. It would have been something different, but we'll never know. Sonya has bad luck. Now, in these games, there's a lot of mathematical peculiarities, a lot of deep hidden mechanics. So there's a lot of peculiar mechanics in these games that are still pretty interesting, such as luck that everybody knows about. Luck is a factor. Battles can be decided on, luck alone. It could sway you one way or the other. Adding extra calculations, again, it's a bit technical, but just know that luck is a stat. 4 COs in the series have luck as their primary gimmick: Nell, Rachel, Flack, and Jugger. However, there's another CO that has a unique quirk involving luck, and that's Sonya. For whatever reason, Sonya was cursed with bad luck, though no in-game lore reasons are given for this. In any battle, her luck will more likely than not swing in the opposite direction. And given that her CO ability is focused more on fog of war maps, meaning it's situational, this makes her sadly a poor choice for selection, which is a shame. This is tweaked a bit in Dual Strike. She's got a buff, making it slightly better, but still, with bad luck, she's just the worst pick you could make, which is a shame. It's unknown why this character just specifically has bad luck, I guess to balance her out in a way, but I don't know. Sensei is Yamamoto. Now, this is just a theory, there's no hard evidence, but there's enough, I think, meat on this bone that it's worth talking about, and a lot of fans of the series have made this connection as well. It seems pretty obvious when you really look at it. Sensei is this character right here. He's visibly the oldest looking character in the series, often just flat out taking naps or talking to himself and just, being a senile old man. Sensei was also noted by the characters in the series as once being one of the greatest COs in the entire world, being incredibly strong and even trained Kanbei himself. This character is Yamamoto, a CO in Super Famicom Wars. Yamamoto obviously being a Japanese name, and the Yellow Comet Nation is strongly implied to be based off real-world Japan, or at least inspired by it. He is also regarded as a legend in that game, being the strongest CO with the most buffs to his units. Where this gets even more interesting is that in the Japanese game, Sensei is referred to as Yamamoto Sensei. So could this be implying that Sensei is an even older version of Yamamoto? And if that were true, that would mean the Advance Wars game and the Famicom Wars games are connected. They're in the same universe. And if that's true, that would imply that in the world of Advance Wars, Hitler is canon. Yikes. So are these two the same characters? Possibly, as at least it's strongly implied in my opinion, but there's no, again, hard evidence or official proof that these two are the exact same person. But with that out of the way, let's move on to the final layer. Final layer. Jugger is Flak. Alright, so here's another fan theory. I know I said I wouldn't do many, but this one I believe is probably the strongest one. At least the strongest one that has not enough hard evidence, but it just makes too much sense to not potentially be true. And it's creepy, and I think it's interesting. So, Flak was one of the Black Hole COs in Advance Wars 2. He is aggressive and not very bright. His mechanics rely mostly on luck, dealing super heavy damage at times, but also very minor damage at others. At the end of the game, he supposedly followed Hawk after Sturm had been defeated. Yet in the next game, which does take place canonically after Advance Wars 2 Dual Strike, we don't see Flak, or Adder for that matter, but with Flak it's a bit more unusual. Instead of Adder and Flak, we get Cole, Jugger, and Kendall, who are a trio known as the Bolt Guard, operating under Von Bolt himself, the antagonist of Dual Strike, and are only loyal to him and not Hawk or Lash. Now, Jugger is a character that is mechanical, but can also be seen as needlessly violent, but also not very bright. Furthermore, when Jugger first meets Jake, he mistakes him at first for Andy. But Jugger has never met Andy, right? Not to mention, Flak is nowhere to be seen in the Dual Strike campaign. Finally, the CO powers of Jugger and Flak are almost exactly the same, relying on luck to deal either heavy damage or basically none at all. So with all these similarities and given Flak's absence, is it possible that Flak was turned into Jugger? Perhaps out of spite, or perhaps had his brain input or brain copied or something into this robot husk? What do you think? This one seems to have a lot more meat on the bone, but it's also a fan theory, so take it with a grain of salt. Tasha and John/Jake. Alright, so again, another fan theory, but I think there's something here. Potentially. It's just fun to speculate sometimes, right? So, Days of Ruin has almost nothing to do with the world of Advance Wars. It's on an entirely new planet, seems like. It's an entirely new game set in an entirely new canon, right? In the campaign of Days of Ruin, when Tasha first meets Will, she mistakes him for her older brother John, who tragically died in the events before Days of Ruin and the meteors that hit the world. She calls Will by her brother's name, John. Now, how does Jake factor into this? Well, Jake, remember the protagonist from Dual Strike, his name in the Japanese version of Advance Wars Dual Strike is John. Now, I know John is one of the most common names in the history of, well, naming people, but take a look at Tasha and Jake. They do look kind of similar, right? And Tasha's brother did die in a war. And keep in mind, the beginning of Days of Ruin, it stated that meteors hit the world and nearly destroyed it. And what's Sturm's CO power? Meteor strike. Starting to see the connection? But the war John died in was the Great War, taking place between Rubinel and Lazuria, so I guess probably not. But just a fun rabbit hole I went down and I wanted to share. What are your thoughts? Mengele. Oh, here we go. So this is Calder, the main antagonist of the Advance Wars Days of Ruin game, and he is an absolute monster of a person. Even before the events of the game, he was the leader of the IDS and was into all sorts of taboo experiments that did nothing but cause suffering and anguish. In the events of the game, he is just cartoonishly evil, killing people for no reason and infecting all of humanity's survivors with this virus. A virus that eats you alive from the inside out using plants. He's a monster. He's also the strongest CO in the game, the only one to be banned from competitive play. So what's up with Mengele? Well, this is Joseph Mengele, another vile, horrible, real-world human being who is aligned with Nazi Germany, a literal, actual Nazi. This man was a monster, conducting horrible human experiments and was particularly interested in twins and hereditary genealogy. Now, let's back up to Calder. Calder is admittedly a clone of his former self, saying that he actually killed his creator. So, what about all this? Well, internally, that's inside the game, inside the development of the game, Calder's name was known as Mengele. So it seems likely that Calder was based on the real-world Nazi scientist Mengele. Horrifying. Also, somewhat of a fun fact I found out in doing the research, in the European version he is known as Stolos, which is based on a demon of the same name, which is often depicted as an owl and is associated with herbalism, and the IDS's mascot is an owl, and Stotolos virus is none other than a virus that causes people to die from having flowers grown in them. Herbalism, right? I mean, this man is just bad news all the way around. What a monster. Let's move on. Mr. Bear. Mr. Bear is the name of the bear that the character Penny holds in Days of Ruin. Penny is this character who is actually a young female clone of Calder and commands some of his troops. Penny talks to Mr. Bear as if it's a person, and Mr. Bear is much more aggressive and dangerous sounding when he responds, which is really just Penny responding through him. Now what's interesting here is that based on the scene you're watching, Penny can have one of up to 4 different bears. Well, either that or it's just a mistake by the artists. So is Mr. Bear even the stuffed bear itself? Or does Penny have an unseen entity like a tulpa just following her around? Or does she just call them all Mr. Bear? That's pretty creepy to think about when you think about it, right? I mean, especially given that it's war and all we know about Calder. It's just I don't know, kind of spooky. Penny is shown to have a broken mind as well, possibly as a result of the cloning or just being one of Calder's experiments. Anyway, but I'll give you a fun fact now to balance it out. Penny is the only CO in Days of Ruin that has anything to do with weather, and is the only CO to have a global day-to-day superpower, where the others only have CO powers when loaded onto a unit. This CO power is only mildly useful, as causing weather to change randomly is not a good skill to have at all and can be a massive detriment to her viability. Thankfully, she does get a happy ending at the end of the game. You're a monster. Quite possibly the most interesting, creepy, and esoteric fact I found on this entire iceberg. Now, I know I didn't cover much of the Game Boy Wars games, you'll have to forgive me. Translations are scarce, and the games, I mean, they're really just not that deep. However, in Game Boy Wars 3, there's a small chance that as you are taking an advantage over the enemy White Moon, they will attempt to surrender. If they surrender, you don't automatically win the game. You have to accept the surrender. However, you can refuse this, prompting the message, "You're a monster." Wow, think about that for a second. But with that, we are done. Thank you so much for watching. I had a lot of fun here and I learned a lot. Now, this was by no means an entire breakdown of all the facts of the series, just the ones that I personally got my hands on and thought were interesting. What did I miss? What could I have improved on? Let me know below, please, respectfully. Although, you know, if you're mad, you probably didn't make it this far. You want more icebergs, though? Check out my Beanie Babies Iceberg or Overlord Iceberg or many other random game not reviews. And as always, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And with that, take care.